The morning news looped quietly in the concourse as passengers for Aurora Air Flight 318 drifted toward Gate B-24, coats slung over arms against Denver's brittle cold. Maya Ortiz, a 29-year-old EMT traveling to Spokane for a cousin's wedding, balanced a paper cup of coffee in one hand and a dog-eared paperback in the other. 2 rows over, high school senior Diego Alvarez stared at mountains through floor-to-ceiling glass as if the ridgelines had secret signatures only he could read. Near the window, Grace Whitaker, a retired English teacher with a voice like a calm lake, hummed to herself, habit, while updating a postcard to her granddaughter. "See you soon, Ellie. The mountains are bright today." Nobody noticed the maintenance team's glances toward a sloping bank of clouds hardening over the front range. February is a season that changes its mind every 10 minutes, and Colorado wears that mood like an old coat. The crew of 318 knew it. Captain William Hart, 57, had flown these routes for decades. First Officer Ethan Cole, 33, wore a disciplined stillness that made passengers feel they were in the hands of someone who could solve chess puzzles in their sleep. In the galley, senior flight attendant Sasha Park checked latches by touch more than sight, calling out each click as comfort. They boarded to the soft chorus of seatbelts and overhead bins. The Altair 400 turboprop, a rugged workhorse with a reputation for shrugging off weather, taxied with the patience of a big, steady animal. There was nothing exotic in the climb-out, nothing cinematic, just the soft nose up, the hand on the armrest, the flicker of sun across the wing. A few minutes after takeoff, the city fell away and the mountains rose with their endless winter grammar, commas of ice, M-dashes of shadow. On the left side of the cabin, children pressed faces to windows as if they could leave smudges on the sky. The first tremor was small enough to hide inside a cough. A vibration threaded along the fuselage, a ripple barely wider than a thought. Maya felt it in her hands before her ears understood it. Her EMT training tuned her body to disturbances. She glanced up. Across the aisle, Sasha's eyes flicked forward, the silent language of crews everywhere. "Did you feel that?" the PA chimed. The captain's voice came calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've hit a pocket of rough air. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened." Rough air it was, but also something else. The clouds that had hung like a ceiling now fractured into teeth. Wind shear pounced from invisible angles. The left engine, loyal as a heartbeat, coughed. A hiccup no one wanted to hear. The plane bucked, recovered, bucked again. Maya gripped the armrests and pictured the map in the seatback card. Not because she needed it, but because structure helps when the world unspools. Then came the bang. Not deafening, not cinematic. A contained, terrible thud, like a door slammed in a tight hallway. The cabin lights flickered. A scent of hot metal breezed through. Diego's eyes went wide, seeking the wing. Icing. He couldn't name it, but he saw the matte creep along leading edges, the kind of winter glaze that looks delicate and is anything but. The de-icing boots pulsed, black rubber inflating, defeating the white. For a moment, it worked. "Ethan, I've got a roll input not responding." Captain Hart's voice in the cockpit was strained, but measured. "Alarms don't scream so much as insist. Ice load, torque imbalance, bleed air fluctuations." A storm line had flexed harder than forecast, and in the narrow arithmetic of mountain weather, margins collapse fast. Sasha moved with an actress's grace, steadying a shaking hand here, a prayer there. Grace Whitaker took Diego's hand without asking. Maya counted breaths, hers, Diego's, the cabin's. The aircraft shuddered again, not like hitting a bump, but like stepping on a step that isn't there. The left engine flamed out, briefly, lit, flamed out again. The prop windmilled, its teeth dulled by the air's violence. Captain Hart made the decision that would save and break them simultaneously. "We're setting up for a forced landing," he told the cabin, voice a bridge over a chasm. "Crew, prepare." The words felt like a horizon shifting. The mountains below were a wolf's back, ridges bristling with trees patrolled by wind. In the cockpit, Ethan called out terrain warnings as he worked the checklist with hands that had practiced these motions into muscle memory. An alpine basin opened like a held breath. A snowfield bordered by boulders and scrub pine, steep on one end, less steep on the other, but all of it a compromise with gravity. "Brace! Brace!" Sasha's call cut through everything, heads bowed, arms clasped, belts bit. The Altair 400 came down, not like a falling star, but like a skipping stone, hard and miraculous. The first contact jarring teeth, the second rattling rib cages, the third and fourth skidding into a surrender that was not death. Metal screamed, a wingtip carved a white trench, a landing gear folded, and something heavy, time perhaps, let go. Silence arrives weird after noise. It was as if the mountain inhaled and refused to exhale. Then, cries, groans, a sob strangled halfway. Maya unbuckled before she knew she had unbuckled. In the cockpit, Captain Hart was slumped against his straps, pulse detectable but threadbare. Ethan's forehead bled into his eyebrow, the bright quick of it shocking in all that white. "Fire risk!" Sasha barked automatically, sniffing. The air held the bitter signature of spilled fuel, but no ignition. Luck's odd lottery, one more time. She threw open the galley panel, yanked extinguishers, scanned. Maya moved from row to row with a triage rhythm, tagging not with tape, but with tone. "You're okay. Stay still. Can you move your toes? Breathe with me. Count to 4. Diego cried without sound, and when he finally found his voice, he said, "Are we? Did we? Are we?" And Maya answered, "We're alive, alive," but on a mountain that kept its own calendar. The fuselage tilted at a stubborn angle, noses pressed into snow as if the plane had come to rest mid-prayer. The afternoon light woke into evening without asking. Cold moved in like a landlord. Maya, Sasha, and Ethan, stitched and bandaged by his own insistence, took stock. There were 27 survivors, 8 with injuries that wanted names and attention now, a fractured ulnar, a dislocated shoulder, rib contusions, a compromised airway that made every breath a negotiation. Sasha laid out a plan with the tempo of someone folding paper cranes under a deadline. "We split the cabin," she said. "Walkable wounded in the rear with the blankets. Non-ambulatory move forward to keep weight centered. We barricade the breach near 13A and insulate with seat cushions and mylar. No flames in here. Vapors are dicey. Chemical hand warmers only. Ration water at 2 ounces per hour. We melt snow in the morning when we can vent." It wasn't command so much as choreography. People learned their steps by watching her. Grace cradled a child whose mother had broken a leg and offered lullabies that made the cold blink. Diego took inventory by writing on an air sickness bag in tidy letters. Water, X42, pretzels, X12, peanuts, X16, juice, X9, first aid, X3. An engineer named Omar Haddad examined the torn aluminum along the starboard side and pronounced it serviceable with a quilt of duct tape and hope. Lou Bennett, 71 and wiry as baling wire, introduced herself like a handshake. "I'm Lou. I did 35 years with the Forest Service. I don't move fast, but I never move wrong." The first night asked for a covenant. Everyone had to agree to the terms. We share heat. We do not panic alone. We speak in full sentences. We don't argue with the dark. Maya led breathing drills, counting 4 in, 4 hold, 6 out, letting breath feel larger than cold for 10 seconds at a time. Sasha moved with blankets like a general distributing ammunition. Ethan, pale but steady, taped a map to the overhead panel and penciled in their best guess at location, a high basin west of the divide, somewhere between granite and sky. Fear did what fear does. It tried to subdivide the group into small islands. A man demanded to hike out now, convinced rescue would never thread its way into this snow. Lou answered him without raising her voice. "Night punishes impatience. Tomorrow we scout, tonight we live. Outside, the storm combed the mountain with its long, invisible fingers. The fuselage creaked in reply, a ship answering a rough sea. Maya checked pupils, pulses, capillary refill, inventing bandages out of shirts, splints out of tray tables, slings out of a scarf. Someone surrendered without a second thought. Grace gathered stories as if they were kindling. Where people were headed, who waited for them, what names to repeat if someone's eyes began to wander. When she told the child about her granddaughter Ellie, she made the word granddaughter feel like a talisman. At midnight, the wind paused, as if to listen. Lou took that as a cue. I want a party of 4 at first light. Strong legs, steady heads, she said. We'll look for a line down. Water always runs to people. We'll follow the terrain that water would pick. Omar nodded, the engineer in him liking the logic. Diego surprised himself by volunteering. I can go. I run cross-country. I know how to follow a ridge and not lose it. Sasha studied him for a long breath and then nodded. You go behind me, you do what I say, and if I say turn back, you don't argue with the echo. Deal? They made a bathroom of the rear stair, a ritual of privacy in a place that had none. They appointed one person to be the yes when new jobs arose. Complaints were rationed like chocolate. 2 per day per person, no rollovers. The mountain made the rules. They made the culture. Near 2 a.m., ice settled on the fuselage with a sound like pages turning. Maya stepped outside with Sasha to check for fuel leaks under the cold stars. The sky didn't glitter. It burned. Thin air makes everything harder and brighter. The basin lay like a crater of sleep. To the east, beyond a rim of trees, a low notch might be a pass or a trick of moonlight. That's our door, Sasha said quietly. If it is, we'll have to pick the lock. They returned to find Grace whispering to the child, sometimes fear is just your imagination trying to help, but it doesn't know how. We tell it what to do. Diego, not sleeping, listened, as if this were chemistry he could learn to mix. Ethan scribbled frequencies and emergency protocols in the margins of a freezer bag, rehearsing the call he'd make if they found a line of sight. 3 hours before sunrise, the temperature bottomed out. Breath hung like speech balloons. Somewhere a joint popped, a bottle rolled, a prayer settled into someone's chest like a stone into a riverbed. At 4:40, Sasha woke the scout team with a hand on each shoulder. Feet first, she said. The old flight attendant joke reshaped for this new world. They layered everything they owned. Lou stuffed pockets with trail mix and humor. If we meet a bear, we tell him it's a potluck and he's late. The fuselage door groaned. Dawn is a promise and a dare. They took both. Outside, snow squeaked the way it does when it's very cold and very clean. The world smelled of cedar and metal and an edge you could cut your mind on. Behind them, the others tucked into each other's heat. Grace began a story about a ship that found its way home by listening to whales, and even those who didn't believe listened. The first night did not break them. It bound them to a plan they would try to keep. By mid-morning, the scout team had mapped the basin with the soles of their boots. The east notch, from the fuselage, had promised like a headline. Up close, it wall-posted its warnings. Wind-scoured ice, cornices hanging like unsaid things, and the kind of drop that turns a misstep into a biography. Lou traced an alternative with her trekking pole, an old instinct made new. We ride the shoulder, she said, pointing to a tree-lined saddle angling south. It'll add hours, but save ankles and arguments with gravity. Sasha deferred without surrendering authority. She was learning leadership as a duet, a call and response between her cabin instincts and the mountain's grammar. Diego, breathing fast but steady, carried the coil of nylon cord like it might teach him patience. Omar took bearings with a compass dug from an emergency kit, the needle feel of it somehow reassuring in an age that thinks only satellites can bless a direction. They moved. Snow to the knee in drifts, hardpack in the shadows, the kind of terrain that makes you learn your feet again. They passed a stand of limber pines twisted by wind into wise shapes. A raven watched from a snag with the amused authority of an audience that has seen this play before. The sun was out but deceptive. The cold kept its appointment. When they crested the saddle, the world widened like a book you'd forgotten you love. Below, a dark line that might be a frozen creek, zigzagging between spruce. Beyond that, a valley that hinted at roads, and roads mean people. They ate in the lee of a boulder, rationing calories as if they were votes. Water runs to people, Lou repeated, tapping the map with a fingernail gone the color of granite. We drop to that creek and follow it downstream until it tells us where the town keeps its heart. The descent was a lesson in humility. Every bootprint argued with gravity. Every step found a story hidden under snow. Stones, downed branches, the polite lies slippery surfaces tell. Twice they heard a deep, far whoomp. Avalanche somewhere else. A sermon delivered to another congregation. Diego felt fear arrive like a gust. He named it and kept moving. At the creek, they discovered a blessing disguised as trouble. It wasn't fully frozen. Here and there, dark windows of running water winked through. Hydration without fire, Omar said, smiling with chapped lips. They dipped bottles, added iodine, and told jokes about cocktails with ridiculous names. Sasha tasted the metallic tang and imagined it turning into blood for those back at the fuselage who needed volume more than flavor. Around a bend, the creek shouldered up to a rock face and narrowed, the ice on either side domed and suspicious. We go single file. Me first, Lou said. The ropes are gossip. If it says someone slips, the rest of you spread and sit. She stepped, tested, stepped. The ice hummed. 2 yards from a lip, a seam sang a higher note and cracked, clean, decisive, dropping Lou to one knee into slush before she flung herself sideways, back onto ice like a seal. Diego's heart did a skydive without the plane. He crouched, instinctively distributing weight, while Sasha, already on her belly, elbowed forward and grabbed Lou's packstrap. Omar anchored with a trunk hug to a pine stout enough to keep promises. They slid Lou back onto thicker ice. Lou rolled onto her back and laughed, a dry bark that made tears jump into the cold, only to freeze. Well, she said, now I'm awake. 100 yards on, the creek widened into gentler options. The valley opened its palm to show a new card. The weather was returning with friends. A curtain of graphite smudged the far ridge. The day had spent itself faster than planned. We won't make town before dark, Sasha said. We mark the route and go back fast. We can stage a real departure tomorrow with the strongest, bring help back sooner. It wasn't what any of them wanted to admit, but the mountain hates ego. They flagged trees with strips torn from a bright airline safety card, arrows of fluorescent orange pointing like prayers. On the return, every landmark felt both familiar and treacherous in reverse. The basin received them like a parent, trying not to show worry. Inside the fuselage, they found smiles that broke and reformed at the edges. Maya's eyes asked for news. There's a path, Sasha told her. It won't be kind, but it's a path. We leave at first light with a smaller team. You, me, Lou, Omar, Diego, maybe one more. The rest bunker down, conserve heat, and keep everyone alive. Maya nodded, relief landing in her shoulders as if it had been searching for them specifically. She briefed them on the interior front. The compromised airway had stabilized with careful positioning. Grace had invented a classroom out of row 18, where stories and warm hands taught bodies to stop shivering so much. Ethan had repaired a handheld radio enough to spit static, but no voice. Terrain blocked their letters to the sky. We can live here a few more days, Maya said. But the math gets uglier every hour. That evening, the wind returned, dragging sleet like beads on a chain. They rigged a snow wall against the fuselage's exposed side, stamping blocks out of drifts with seat cushions cut into patterns. Lou showed Diego how to stack them so they interlocked like paragraphs that flow. Grace tested the wall by leaning with her whole gentle weight. It will do, she declared, which felt like getting an A from a teacher you always wanted to impress. Before sleep, they held a meeting that was oddly ceremonial. Sasha laid down the rules for the traverse: pack weight limits, signs for stop, slow, water, a whistle code, no heroes on blind corners, and a sacred veto any member could call if the mountain grew teeth in a way they didn't like. "We walk out as a raft," she said. "No one swims alone." The mountain listened without comment. Stars hid behind a ragged scarf of cloud. Somewhere below, the creek practiced the sound of persistence. They left at dawn, with breath steaming and resolve set. Maya shouldered the medical pack, its weight a promise and a threat. Sasha took point, small and unflinching, the rope a bright umbilical connecting lives. Lou moved like a map remembered in muscle. Omar carried tools and the smile of someone whose brain liked problems more than opinions. Diego, last in line, tried to walk quieter than his doubts. For the first hour, the basin seemed to bless them. The snow had settled, the sky was a gentler grey, and the human body given a job forgets for a while to be afraid. They made the saddle, followed the flagged trees, reached the creek with less drama than the day before. Progress is a narcotic, and they took small doses with gratitude. Then the weather veered. Wind rose from the west as if a door had opened somewhere and impatience had walked through. Snow, a thickening of the air rather than decoration, arrived in sheets. Landmarks simplified into silhouettes. The rope was no longer just prudence, it was the sentence that kept them grammatical. Sasha shortened intervals, her calls crisp as metronome clicks. Step, test, step, hold. At midday they found a meadow glazed in wind crust, the trees holding their snow like shrugging shoulders. They crossed carefully, each step a question. Halfway, the crust betrayed the second person in line. Omar punched through to his thigh with a yelp that turned into a laugh when he realized he'd stopped. "I found the soft spot," he announced, breath fogging. Lou backtracked, redistributed weight, talked him through extraction like a dance. The meadow surrendered them reluctantly. Hunger arrived in emphasized italics. They ate stuttering handfuls of trail mix, sucking on hard candy to trick stomachs that believe in sugar more than reason. Maya checked fingers for color, adjusted a bootlace, pulled Diego's hat down over ears like a sister. Diego blinked hard at gratitude he hadn't planned on feeling. "I'm okay," he said, which meant, "I want to be the kind of person who says I'm okay and makes it true." In early afternoon, the creek corridor tightened again, this time offering a different hazard. A small avalanche chute terminus where debris had frozen into a messy toffee of ice, branches and rock. "We detour upslope," Lou decided. "It'll be nasty for 100 yards, then better." Nasty was the word. They sidestepped on a steep, slick pitch where each boot wanted to make its own plans. Sasha anchored the rope around a stump and belayed like she'd been born to it. Maya, halfway across, felt the mountain shift just a whisper and saw a thin plate of snow slide loose above her, accelerating into a sheet. There was no time for a shout, only for a decision. She threw herself into the slope, swung her cramponless boot against ice, caught a root with gloved fingers that screamed. The sheet slid past, peeling off like old paint. It scoured their path but did not take them. After, the silence felt like applause withheld by a very stern audience. At 3 p.m., as light considered downsizing, they reached the valley mouth, where the creek met a wider river, frozen and snow-buried, but with a sound underneath, like a distant engine. On the far bank, a sliver of metal at a funny angle. The brain inventories possibilities, the heart jumps to hope. They crossed where the ice felt most honest, testing with poles, listening for that low thrum that means not today. The metal resolved itself into a rusted signpost whose message had weathered away save for one stubborn word, Ranger. The word changed everything. Civilization had sent a breadcrumb into the woods and it hadn't fully dissolved. "We're inside someone's map," Omar said, the engineer's delight unfreezing his face. Lou scanned upslope. "If there's a post, there was once a trail. Trails go somewhere named. They followed the ghost of it. Switchbacks asleep under snow, occasional cut logs that betrayed human hands. Near dusk they saw it, a dark smudge against the trees that became a structure as they neared, square and utilitarian, with a small porch and windows clouded by cold scenes. A firewatch cabin, out of season but real. Sasha whooped, a ragged, happy sound that scared a squirrel into a speech about boundaries. The cabin's door resisted, then yielded. Inside, a pot-bellied stove, a steel locker, a calendar from a summer 2 years ago, and a radio mounted high like a god. Lou went straight to the stove, hands moving in the priestly motions of kindling, tinder, breath. Omar opened the locker and found a treasure chest disguised as a checklist. Emergency rations, a first aid kit, less airline and more forest, a packet of matches that looked brand new, and, most holy of holies, a spare radio battery sealed in plastic. Sasha climbed a chair and touched the radio with reverence and hurry. Maya handed her the battery as if passing a scalpel. The radio accepted it with a small, dignified beep. Static greeted them like an old dog, suspicious of visitors. Sasha depressed the transmit key. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Aurora Air Flight 318 survivors calling from a firewatch cabin. Coordinates unknown, somewhere west of the divide. We have 27 souls, multiple injuries, stable for now, requesting immediate assistance. She released. Static. She tried again, rotating through frequencies Ethan had scribbled. Static then, like a coin dropped into a jar. A voice, thin, hesitant, but undeniably human. Copy May, repeat, identify you're over. No one breathed. Sasha looked at the others, eyes shining with the knowledge that the world had just grown larger again. We copy, she said, steady, tears freezing at the corners of her smile. We're here. The voice on the radio was thin as fishing line and just as impossible not to hold. Copy May Day, identify. Sasha pressed the transmit key and said each syllable like a rung on a ladder. Aurora Air Flight 318 survivors, 4 at a firewatch cabin, 23 at fuselage in Alpine Basin. We have injuries. Battery limited. The line crackled, then cleared in a miracle the size of a breath. This is Ranger Station Silver Vale. I'm Carmen Ruiz. We're with County Search and Rescue. Can you provide coordinates? The room looked at one another with the same question. The cabin's wall map offered a painter's confidence but a cartographer's vagueness. Omar laid their paper map on the table, matched valleys with fingers, and found the river bend they'd crossed, the saddle they'd crested, the basin that felt like the world's shallow bowl. Lou triangulated with the stubborn memory of terrain and the science of shadows. Diego measured the distance between landmarks using Sasha's rope like a ruler. We're somewhere between Willow Notch and Elk Shoulder, Lou said, choosing names that probably sounded quaint on summer postcards and murderous in February. Omar added bearings from the compass and an estimate of pace count. Sasha read it all into the microphone. The radio thought about it and then answered, Copy, we can work with that. We're spinning up a ground team and coordinating aviation when weather allows. Keep this channel open at the top of every hour. Conserve battery the rest of the time. At Mayzeras they spoke in sentences that felt like supplies. Carmen Ruiz's voice became a tether that stretched across wind and timber. She asked for a quick medical picture. Maya, drawing on instincts older than sleeplessness, reported vitals for the worst off back at the fuselage and the status of each member of the Traverse team. Our captain is critical but alive, she said. Multiple contusions, possible internal bleeding. We've stabilized an airway with positioning, hypothermia risk across the board. Carmen's reply carried the clean weight of focus. Understood. We're sending 2 teams, one to your cabin, one to the wreck. If the air opens, we'll get eyes in the sky. Back at the basin, Ethan stood in the aisle like a conductor who knew the symphony could go wrong at any bar. He organized watches and warm-ups, traded jokes he didn't have energy for, and listened for the radio check-ins like they were church bells. Grace kept stories flowing to order time. The child she held learned to blow on her hands like a game. Lou had said night punishes impatience. Ethan now learned that day punishes drift. He assigned pairs to assess the snow wall, to inventory food again, to count breaths of those who slept. When the fuselage creaked, everyone looked up as if the mountain had said their name. The Traverse team built a different kind of day. They turned the cabin into a command cell, stove ticking like a heartbeat, damp socks steaming on a chair back, the map annotated with arrows that looked increasingly like a plan. At the noon check-in, Carmen patched them through to SAR lead Tate Monroe, whose voice carried the clipped vowels of someone with less time than hope. We're 12 miles out as the crow flies, which means 20 by foot. Avalanche risk is elevated. If you can mark your route with something bright, do it. Any orange? Sasha glanced at the safety card in her pocket, already sacrificed into strips. We've been planting breadcrumbs, she said. We'll plant more. Copy. And listen. If you can get a signal mirror up high tomorrow, it might help aircraft. Sasha looked at the frost-framed window and pictured the ridge. Lou nodded before the idea was fully spoken. At first light, she said, Diego, warming hands over the stove, imagined sunlight as a tool he could hold. They rationed the radio like matches. Between calls, they stitched up their humanity. Omar confessed he'd never learned to like winter, and yet here he was, performing a quiet duet with it. Maya admitted her greatest fear wasn't dying, but failing someone who would live. Lou described 35 summers of reading mountains until they spoke in complete sentences. Sasha told a story about a turbulence day years ago when a passenger had stood up to help another. A small, generous mutiny that taught her authority is something you borrow from trust. At dusk, the line carried a new sound. The distant hollow thrum of rotor blades, then the painful swat of wind shoved into the wrong shape. Carmen's voice came tight. Helicopter launched, cloud ceiling flirting with our minimums. They ran outside as if they could lift the weather with their eyes. Snow sifted like sand in an hourglass poured sideways. A grey shape ghosted somewhere above the ridge. There, not there, there again. The mountain bared its teeth. Abort, abort, a thin voice snapped through static. The thrum diminished, replaced by the soft, indifferent applause of snow against coats. Night tried to turn hope brittle. They refused, deliberately. Diego started a roll call of reasons, a ritual where each picked one thing they wanted to bring home. Ellie's postcard, Grace had said earlier. Now, in the cabin, Maya answered, that child's laugh. Lou said, my ankles. And they laughed harder than the joke earned, because laughter is a way of keeping weather out. Sasha looked at the radio, the small green eye blinking, and said, this voice. At the top of the hour, Carmen returned with a plan that sounded like a promise. Ground teams moving at dawn. Conditions marginal, but improving. If you can, meet them halfway on your marked route. We'll vector them to your cabin first, then push to the fuselage. Sasha acknowledged. Then she added softly, because some words need to be said out loud to become real. Tell them we're not leaving anyone alone up here. Batteries saved. Stove low. The cabin sank into a sleep that was more truce than rest. Outside, the mountains shaped the wind into questions. Inside, they shaped answers into a morning. Morning arrived in blue. They used it like ink. Lou and Sasha took the ridge toward an open shoulder where a mirror might speak sky. Omar and Diego dropped to the river bend to lay out an SOS in branches scored clean of snow. Maya, after a last check on hands and feet, shouldered the radio to the porch and logged the hour with Carmen. We're splitting tasks, she reported. No heroics. We plan to return to the fuselage after contact with SAR so we can bring back heat and certainty. The ridge was a flight of steep, stunted steps. Sasha climbed as if authority were momentum, her breath counting time. Lou set anchors with the casual competence that makes danger behave. They reached a slab of rock that faced east, the sun dragging itself over cloud tattered enough to let light through. Sasha angled the mirror, just a salvaged tray polished by sleeve, toward the widest piece of sky and swept slowly. Signal mirrors don't throw a beam so much as write a rumor. 3 minutes became 10, then 20. At last, the radio hissed awake. "We have a glint! Hold your angle." Tate's voice arrived audibly grinning. "Air unit can't push in, but our ground team just cheered. We're on your line." Down by the river, Diego and Omar turned art into cartography. The letters they shaped were too big to see up close, but made sense from height. SOS. And next to it a long arrow pointing to the cabin as if hope needed directions. A pair of ravens landed like critics and hopped through the O with appraising tilts. 5 stars, Omar asked. One raven croaked a single imperfect note that sounded like maybe. By mid-morning, the radio carried boot reports. Snow depths, tree wells, a bridge washed out the previous spring and replaced with a log that now slept under ice. "We're 6 clicks out," a rescuer said, her voice clipped with work and kindness. "We can make the cabin before dark. The fuselage first light tomorrow if the ridge doesn't argue." Sasha's shoulders let down a fraction. She wanted to run in every direction at once. Forward to pull help faster, back to keep people warmer. Leadership is the art of walking at the speed of trust. They chose a hybrid. Sasha and Diego would trot down the flagged route to intercept the ground team and guide them in. Maya and Omar would pack what the fuselage needed most. Chemical warmers, a more robust first aid kit the cabin locker had promised, the kind of certainty that lets people sleep. Lou, whose ankle had begun to whisper complaints no stoic could ignore, would guard the radio, the stove, and the thin line of power in the spare battery. "I hate sitting," she admitted. "Consider it strategic stillness," Maya said. "You'll be our beacon." Sasha and Diego moved like punctuation, commas where the rope demanded pause, exclamation points when the flagged trees appeared after blind corners. At the creek choke, Diego remembered Lou's near soak and chose the wider bend, sacrificing minutes for safety, like paying a toll you're grateful exists. Near the meadow, they saw what at first looked like bushes moving. Then the bushes arranged into people, bright parkas, packs that made them taller, poles that made them patient. The team's lead lifted a hand, and relief detonated in Diego's chest so fast it made him laugh out loud. "You must be Sasha," the woman called. "I'm Lark. This is Ben, Aditi, Marek. We brought sleds, hot packs, and better jokes." Back at the cabin, Lou plotted the next hours like a campaign. Maya and Omar shouldered out with a toboggan rig whose orange fabric looked almost festive against the day's whites and blues. They traveled with the practiced slowness of people who've learned that hurrying is often a synonym for short-sighted. On the ridge, the signal mirror kept pulsing its polite insistence. In the basin, Ethan lined up the cabin's new reality against the fuselage's old one and tried to write a sentence that joined them. By late afternoon, the cabin filled with the kind of mess that feels like progress. Steam, gear, stew that tasted better than its ingredients because appetite is seasoning. Lark's team unfolded maps and laid fingers exactly where the survivors' drawings had predicted. "You did half our work," she told Sasha. "You made the mountain legible." Sasha shook her head. "Lou did, Diego did, Omar, Maya, the mountain allowed." They debated the question that had paced their bones since day one. Do we march to the fuselage tonight? The answer came from wind, temperature, and a small, decisive truth. Tired feet make bad rescue partners. At first light, Lark concluded, we go heavy, slow, and sure. We bring everyone out who can walk. We pull the rest. No one cheered. They nodded, which, in a place like this, is louder. That night, Carmen patched in a miracle of logistics and love. A phone patch for 30 seconds each, with one pre-selected family contact. The timing was chaotic, the connections worse. But for a handful of survivors, the mountain briefly bent so voices could meet. Grace spoke to Ellie and said, I'm learning new lullabies. And Ellie said, I kept your postcard by the window. Ethan left a message for Captain Hart's wife because the patch dropped and he refused to spend his 30 seconds on silence. Maya closed her eyes and listened as someone 3 states away told her to eat something and rest, the 2 simplest commandments that survivors so often break. When midnight came, even the ravens slept. The stove ticked. Luck snored in a way that made Diego grin into his borrowed blanket. Tomorrow had a plan, and for the first time, a schedule that looked like it might keep its promises. It began beautifully, which is how near disasters prefer to start. The morning was clean and blue, the kind of clarity rescuers distrust because it makes everyone overconfident. Lark's team ate like athletes and packed like surgeons. Sasha briefed Ethan, "We're coming. Hold routines. Keep everyone warm and still." Ethan reported back, Captain Hart worse color, pulse stubbornly present. They moved in 2 braided files, rescuers and guides, orange and blue, and the complicated color of courage. Sleds hissed like whispers. At the saddle, wind tugged at hoods without distorting decisions. Lou, ankle-taped, insisted on the rear, a shepherd with a field full of reasons. Diego found himself in the middle, the safest place for a heart that had done too much and not enough. Halfway to the basin, the day shifted. A thin cloud unrolled over the ridge, gauze thickening to curtain. Temperature ticked up just enough to make the top layer sulk. Lark stopped the line and listened with the ear experienced teaches. A faint wrong whoomp answered, the sound of a slab settling above and ahead. "We go lower," she said, tapping a new line. "Spread out, be the world's worst marching band." Twice they crossed beneath hangfire and felt the mountain hold its breath. Twice it exhaled without committing. At the creek choke, water decided to show off. Yesterday's singing ice now sang none at all. Ben proposed a bridge. Saws whispered. Dead saplings became a ladder across the narrowest place. Sasha went first, asking honest questions with each step. The saplings answered. Diego followed, looking at the water like a rumor he refused to spread. The sleds crossed last under a web of lines and patience. The fuselage appeared like a lost punctuation mark, scabbed with snow, still the center of their paragraph. Faces bloomed in the door. Grace's relief, Ethan's controlled release, the child's guarded joy. Rescuers did not rush. They practiced the discipline of not startling pain. Inside, warmth gusted from bodies arranged in geometry only necessity invents. Lark's team became an orchestra. Vitals, splints, heat packs nested at armpits and groins, warm fluid rationed by kidneys and hope. Maya went straight to Captain Hart. Leadership wears a face even in sleep. His breathing was shallow, skin was doing quiet arithmetic no one could balance. She tucked heat where it mattered, palpated for betrayal, scanned pupils for stories she didn't want to hear. Hart's hand found Ethan's without opening his eyes. "We're almost out, Captain," Ethan said, voice steady because someone's had to be. Extraction moved like chess. Those who could walk, walked. Sled 1 carried a tibia fracture and a will of iron. Sled 2 bore a woman whose lungs chose panic. Grace rode beside her telling whale stories until panic got bored. Sled 3 waited for Captain Hart. Lark and Maya consulted in looks and low sentences. Move him now and risk the bumps. Leave him and risk the ticking. The sky complicated matters. Wind slid down the basin wetter, heavier. Snow started gluing itself to everything. "Windows closing," Lark said. "We push a first wave to the cabin. We return if the slope allows. No hero points today, only arrival points." Ethan volunteered to remain. Sasha shook her head. "You go now," she said, surprising herself with the firmness. "You've held us together for 3 days. Pillars crack. Get down. Call his wife when the patch opens." Ethan looked as if arguing would be theft. He nodded. On the first switchback out of the basin, the mountain made good on its threats. A small wind slab sheared, too small to headline training manuals, big enough to break ankles and plans. Snow ran low and fast. From the middle, Diego saw the white tongue lick toward them. He sat, spread, shouted, the choreography Lou had drilled. The slab washed his boots and went on, a petulant child denied. The sled line wobbled. then steadied under many hands. Lark swore softly, the profanity of relief and ritual. Keep moving, slow as law. They reached the cabin by the math of inches. Inside, tea was more medicinal than ingredients. Lou hugged Diego with both arms and no apology. Omar checked the radio twice for luck. Carmen rode in on a favorable gust. Forecast worsening tonight, improving after dawn. We can push a snowcat to the trailhead by afternoon tomorrow. Air the day after, if sealing behaves. Lark absorbed it like a general redrawing maps. We dig in, we go again at first light. That night, Captain Hart's body made its decision. He slipped away between watch changes as if leaving during the quiet would be kinder. Maya felt it first in the pulse that wasn't. She closed his eyes and placed his hand on his chest, like lowering a flag. Ethan wept, with all the control he'd loaned the group suddenly returned to its owner. Grace whispered a prayer that was also a thank you. Morning came heavy and necessary. The second wave did not dazzle, it persisted, hauling, bracing, coaxing, counting. They did not lose another soul. At the cabin, Carmen met them on the porch with a smile that could heat a room. Roads broken open to staging, she said. Ambulances waiting. You did the hard part. We'll do the rest. Loading the last sled, Sasha touched the fuselage with her glove, a benediction to the metal body that had kept so many human ones intact. We're taking everyone, she told the mountain. The wind didn't argue. The convoy down from the snow line felt like a parade and a confession. Snowmobiles chuffed, the snowcat roared, sleds bumped and declared their opinions. Civilization returned in stages, a graded road unreal after so much wild geometry, a gate, a cluster of vehicles wearing words, county, rescue, fire, that meant different flavors of salvation. The staging area was a ballet of competence. Tents breathed warm air, lights hummed, diesel and coffee mixed into proof that ordinary miracles still existed. Names were checked, pulses taken, blankets doubled. Cameras stayed respectfully far, but felt like weather on the nape of the neck. Carmen stood like a lighthouse at the edge, grinning through exhaustion. Welcome home, she told each arrival. And somehow the phrase fit even for those who'd never been in this county before. Reunions are deliberately messy. People tripped over gurney legs to reach familiar hands. A man in oil-stained coveralls cried into Omar's shoulder without requesting permission. Grace's granddaughter Ellie wore a pink pom-pom hat, and the expression of a child discovering her grandmother is both mortal and miraculous. You kept your promise, she said. You too, Grace answered, because waiting is its own mountaineering. Sasha stepped aside and realized she didn't know what to do with hands that weren't holding someone else's safety. Lark handed over a paper cup of coffee that tasted like the first day of school. You did good, Lark said. Sasha tried for a joke and found her mouth out of practice. The mountain allowed, she managed, and people demanded. Ethan made the call he'd promised. He spoke to Captain Hart's wife from a folding chair at the tent's edge, where spruce tallied the wind like an abacus. He avoided euphemism and wrapped grief in gratitude. He kept us alive long enough to be found, Ethan said. He made the decision that let us have this conversation. The line did what lines do under such weight, went quiet, then carried the exact sounds humans make when language is insufficient. Ethan listened as if it were work. Empty chairs haunted the edges. Days later, a memorial grew at the airport. Flowers under a wall, paper cranes, notes in block, and cursive like weather maps. The airline set out a book. The book swallowed names. Grace wrote, "For William Hart, who landed us where courage could find us." Maya drew a small square, the safety card's missing corner, because sometimes drawing is more faithful than saying. Diego signed with hands that still remembered rope angles and avalanche math. Hospital rooms are their own mountains. The first night off the ridge brought IV poles, beeping monitors, the soft tyranny of schedules in dry erase. Maya woke twice sure she'd missed a radio check, only to find a nurse smiling the universal smile of the travel-worn. Lou finally let her ankle have opinions and was sentenced to a boot that made her walk like a determined astronaut. Omar fell asleep mid-sentence and woke mid-laugh. Sasha insisted she was fine until a doctor with the soft authority of evidence told her adrenaline is not a vitamin. Reporters chased angles. Survivors chased sleep. The airline sent representatives with apologies crafted by lawyers and meals crafted by people who understand comfort. Ethan bought a small notebook and wrote down the details you think you'll never forget, but do: names, times, the two ravens inspecting their letter O, larks snore. He added a page for the stories that ended on the mountain because memory is a form of rescue. When the first group flew home, this time on a jet whose engines felt like architecture, Sasha hesitated at the door. Grace touched her elbow. "We get to write the ending, not the mountain," she said. Sasha stepped into a cabin that didn't creak like a ship or smell like cedar and fear. She took a window seat and watched the wing take the sky with the nonchalance of progress. Homecomings weren't symmetrical, but they were honest. Some houses hung banners. Some kept quiet. Some dinner tables made room for stories. Others let silence do the mending. Ellie asked Grace whether whales sing in snow. "They do in mine," Grace said, and together they invented a new lullaby you don't forget. The mountain moved into their lives the way a scent does. Everywhere, hard to name, ambushing them in grocery aisles and stairwells. Trauma isn't linear. It loops, doubles back, hides under small talk, jumps out at the ends of movies. They built routines around it the way you hang curtains around a draft. Maya returned to 12-hour shifts and learned a new mathematics of relief. After triaging a frozen cabin, a city Friday felt both lighter and crueler. Helicopters narrowed her world to a pinhole. Breathing widened it again. She kept the safety card strip in her wallet and touched it before calls that smelled like February. She enrolled in wilderness medicine, not for certification, she had that, but for respect, for land that tried to kill and allowed her to save. Sasha took a leave, then, because purpose sedates better than rest, co-wrote a training module, Mountain Incidents, Cabin Crew Leadership. In the video, she didn't posture as a hero. She modeled borrowing authority from trust and paying it back in decisions. She wrote to Carmen, Lark, and Silver Vale, "You taught me rescue is a language." They replied with variants of, "You spoke it fluently." Diego tried to return to high school senior, discovered the hallway had shrunk. Teachers watched as if he'd visited somewhere sacred and dangerous, which he had, but calculus did not care. He ran track in air that felt too thick and relearned his lungs. He read snow science, incident command, and toboggan rigging. A Saturday at the farmer's market, he found the SAR outreach table and asked more questions than the volunteer had answers for. A year later, he'd earn a patch. For now, he practiced stacking fear beside goals, so neither toppled the other. Lou went home to her own edge-of-forest cabin, where the wind made familiar arguments with the eaves. She brewed coffee strong enough to carry small furniture and read the mountain like an old friend who sometimes steals. She trimmed trails no one thanked her for and left notes young rangers would find and feel clever. On the mantel, she placed a coil of bright nylon, not a trophy, but a reminder of a sentence she'd helped write. "No one swims alone." Omar found that meetings about tolerances and margins sent his pencil-drawing cabins instead of circuits. He sketched a compact, cheap field filter that didn't complain. Shipping that idea to reality would take years. Meanwhile, he called his mother every Sunday and let her talk too long about anything but the week he almost didn't come home. Ethan spoke at Hart's memorial with care that turned grief into gratitude. He carried in his pocket a captain's coin. Hart once tossed him as a joke. He rubbed it like a worry stone. He signed up for mountain flying familiarization because knowledge is a way to keep questions from heckling you at night. He drafted a letter to Hart's wife and let it sit a month until he found the right verbs. Kept, fought, taught. Healing wasn't tidy. Nightmares don't clock out. Some survivors became experts at finding exits in rooms that didn't require them. Others cried in the produce aisle because a fruit matched the color of a parka. Grace wrote more postcards than the postal system deserved, small rectangles of steadiness to strangers who'd found her address. Ellie drew whales in snow hats and mailed them to the Ravens, care of the Forest Service. Someone at the station pinned them to a corkboard and called it policy. On the first anniversary, those who could secured permits and hiked back, not courting danger, domesticating memory. The stove was the same, the calendar newer. A county map now had a red circle around a nameless basin. They left a thermos, a poem Grace printed in 14-point for tired eyes, and an orange safety strip under a magnet. Outside, ravens performed a slow flyby, as if inspecting returning tenants. They spoke about what to carry and what to set down. "I'll keep the calm that wasn't mine, it was loaned to me, and return the guilt that never belonged," Maya said. "I'll keep the rope," Sasha added. "I'll keep the map," Diego said, "and leave the part that thought asking for help was failure." "I'll keep my ankles," Lou insisted, and the mountain pretended not to smile. Stories end best with the door ajar. The ridge remains, indifferent, essential. The basin keeps winter like a secret. The creek remembers how to run under ice and how to laugh in June. The scar their fuselage left in snow melted into a strange green line that summer, a wildflower argument about color. The mountain didn't make a plaque. People did. Ask them what the miracle was, and they'll offer truths that fit together like a shelter built from mismatched parts. Maya, the way a room refused to panic in unison. Sasha, the loan of authority from strangers who let her spend it. Diego, learning to feel fear and still step into the next footprint. Lou, luck that didn't feel like luck until later. Ethan, checklists married to a wild generosity that refused to do math with human lives. Official reports listed contributing factors and timelines, winds aloft and ice accretion rates, performance curves of a turboprop aging toward grace. Recommendations appeared, perhaps a regulation with a number for those who prefer numbers to names. Good. Those make future miracles easier to manufacture. But reports could not capture Grace's voice warming a 5-degree cabin, or how a safety card can point through forest, or how the word ranger can widen a day's horizon. What they built afterward wasn't a cult of calamity. It was a practice of attention. At potlucks, memorials, airport corridors, they learned to ask better questions. Are you sleeping? Do you need to talk about the wind today? Do you want silence with your coffee? They learned to look up when helicopters passed and to be at peace with whatever that look brought. 2 years on, Diego hiked the trail wearing a SAR pack that now belonged to him. On the cabin porch, he replaced the faded orange strip under the magnet. In the logbook, he wrote, "We came through here once as strangers tied by a rope. We left understanding that courage is a direction more than a feeling." He drew a small O that looked like a raven, if you were generous. Sasha returned to line duty with a new habit. Before takeoff, she'd pause to look down the aisle and see not seats, but landscapes of lives. Her briefings included, "We will take care of each other," and she meant it in ways that can't be laminated. Maya hung a cheap mirror at an odd angle, so morning sun found it and cast a stripe of light across her kitchen. "For the pilots," she told visitors. "For the rescuers," she added. "For us," she finished silently. Grace told Ellie a final whale story about a calf singing in a key it thought was wrong until the pod turned and sang with it. "Is that true?" Ellie asked, the world's best fact-checker. "It is now," Grace said, "because some truths are born only when shared." At the county's edge, where the road forgets to straighten and trees crowd like curious neighbors, a small sign appeared that only locals notice. It doesn't name the wreck or the storm. It says, "From crash to courage," and points up a forest road that ends at a hill with a view. On clear days, you can see the shoulder they walked, the basin that held them, and the line of spruce where the ravens punctuated their story. Most people read, shrug, and drive on. A few pull over, step out, and let the cold argue against lingering. If they stay long enough, they hear it too, the mountain asking its old questions, and somewhere faint but stubborn, voices on a wire answering, "We copy. We're here."